Takes. Hey, happy Friday. I'm thrilled to be here today with Michael Craven. We are going to be discussing gray divorce. What is the graying of divorce? What is happening? And I'm so excited to talk about this, Michael. So tell us what it is. What's going on with these people?
Thanks, Betsy. First, I really appreciate being here. It's an honor. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Uh, Divorce and gray divorce is a substantial part of my practice, so I like talking about it. And with all divorces, having good people, to as resources is really important. And real estate is a huge part of many, many divorces. So, I'm glad to be connected with you. So right into it, what is a gray divorce? Well, it's a trend, really. There's no technical technical definition for a gray divorce. So anybody could define it differently, but it's essentially a reference to, this gray hair stuff coming in later in life. And so it references a certain demographic in the population, people, I'll say 55 and older. And generally, at least with respect to my practice, people who've been married a pretty long time, 25 plus years. And this demographic is actually a huge portion of the people that get divorced today. In years past, it was a small portion, but over the last decade or so, it's increased, and more people 55 and plus are getting a divorce. So it's an interesting area to be in.
So I'm assuming that it makes it a little more, in some ways, more complicated, in other ways, less complicated. And I have to say that maybe my mom was a trendsetter, because I think it was I don't even remember, 1994, years ago. She's gone now, but she, after 40 some odd years of marriage, my mother and father got divorced. So while they didn't have to worry about the kids, it presented, we were all grown adults, it presented other problems. So what kind of problems are you seeing there?
Well, your mom definitely was a trendsetter. I mean, things have changed since that time, and I think some of the reasons for it are, back when your mom got divorced, there was much more of a stigma attached to divorce. I don't really think there is one today. And I think also women didn't have the same opportunities to be independent back then and more reliant upon support. So, nowadays the women are often the driver of all divorces, including gray divorces. But I think the number one change is that people are living longer. And everybody knows the saying 60 is the new 50 or similar types of expressions. And, somebody, 50 years ago when they hit 60, they're like, well, I'm going to be dead soon. Why get divorced? But now, people are saying I have 20, 30, maybe more years to live, and they're healthier and they want to live their life happily. But you are right. In some ways, a gray divorce is simpler, and in other ways, it's definitely more complex. I think some of the factors that come into the gray divorce arena are both, I guess I would lump them in two big categories: emotional and financial. So I think the emotional part of it, which obviously isn't legal, but as a counselor to all my clients, I have to kind of help them go through this process emotionally too. But, we're talking about long-term relationships occurring at a very vulnerable time in people's lives. They're either, they're done accumulating their nest egg, or they're almost done doing that. And so there's fears related to that. They've had a long-term relationship that's being separated, divided, dissolved. And that's not just with their spouse. It's with, in-law families. It's with their friends that are often coupled up, and you don't know which side everybody's going to. It's with your community, your neighborhood. Often, in your field, often it's people who've been tied to a home for a real long time, and they don't know what's going to happen to that. So there's, the emotional part of it is extremely important. And often, you you have two different people in a divorce. So often you have two spouses that are at different stages of that emotional spectrum.
Mhm.
And you cannot make a lot of headway until both people sort of catch up to each other.
So
And
that's interesting. That's really interesting. How do you, I mean, and I know every case is different. And I'm listening to you, and a lot of what I do, we are counselors, even though we're
Mhm.
not counselors, because we
Right.
deal with very emotional parts of people's lives. Um, so do you wait for them to catch up? Do you nudge how does that, how do you manage that?
So every
Emotionally.
case, yeah, that's a great question. Every case is different for sure. But some cases have immediate needs for various different reasons. There could be some kind of business problem arising or other things, and in other cases there is time to wait. So where possible, it is good to give people some time to catch up and to understand what's going on and to take it all in and be able to move forward, in a pretty logical way versus an emotional way. But there are limits to that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, you got to know where that is.
right, right. So like I said, every case is different, but I think as a general rule, it is good to give people some space and time, because there's a lot of things that you could do that's productive for the client and for the case in general to move it forward. You just have to be diplomatic about how you do it.
Yeah. I guess it's one of those things you got to give time, but not too much time. But, and I've seen the cycles, and I've told friends, they're really nice in the beginning, then they get really angry, then they get spiteful, and you watch all these emotions, but, um, you know, your skill over the years is going to give you uh, a gut. I'm sorry, but you're going to know when enough is enough.
Right.
Where you can
And
see it going off the rails.
right, which is and actually that leads into another really important issue in the gray divorce arena. Divorce cases can be very quick, uncontentious, um, and people can leave and move on with their lives. And others, as I'm sure all your viewers who are watching would understand, that there's the War of the Roses cases too that take years, and everybody has spent a lot of money and they've spent a lot of emotional currency also. So you get to a point in a case where people just are like, I'm tired, I want to be done, I don't care. And that may not be as critical for a 35-year-old who has the opportunity to rebuild, and whether it's finances or family or whatever the case is. But for people at like my stage of life, that isn't always so easy to do that. And so sometimes people, my clients, want to concede and get the case over with, because it's been long, it's been expensive, it's been draining financially and emotionally. But throwing in the towel can have a really big impact, because a graying divorce client may not have that opportunity, like a 35-year-old, to not have the benefit of time to get themselves back. So you have clients that are willing to accept something that I suspect, I mean, I'm not a financial expert as far as investments go, but I have a pretty strong background in that. And you don't want your client to take a deal that or suspect strongly that they're just not going to be able to live their life the way they think they're going to live it. So you're going to have a client 2, 3, 5 years down the road that has buyer's remorse and is going to be very bitter about their situation.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so
But then, I think that that's where you have to say there's a difference between trying to get every last squeeze nickel, because that isn't going to matter.
100%.
But to getting to a place where you can exist and live, and there's somewhere in between there, and I'm sure that's where you try to get.
Right. So a lot of these particular cases, I think, require building a team often, and making sure that your clients, one, are staying healthy through the process. I mean, in every case they should do that, but I think it's particularly important, for people 55 and plus. So, you want to make sure your clients are continuing their social life and eating well, exercising well, and have their security friend network and family network, but also more professional network too. And, in a lot of these cases, I will have my clients talk to financial planners, investment people, because the practicality of people getting divorced later in life, long-term marriages, they've accumulated more than younger people. And so you need more sophisticated people on your team.
That's excellent. I love that, because then you're everybody's working together. You've got your financial plan, your tax. I know you're a CPA, but still your accountant, maybe a therapist, maybe, sometimes you bring in a realtor if you need to know the cost of the home, the assets. And to, from a real estate point of view, to talk about, well, what is it going to cost you to go wherever you're going? How do they know? So.
I mean, I would say, there's maybe 3 or 4 big financial areas in the Great Divorce, and real estate is that, and retirement accounts are probably the 2 big ones, because they often represent a large portion of people's wealth. And the houses are very interesting. I mean, my experience, this is only anecdotal, I don't necessarily have data on it, but prior to 2008, when I'm sure, Betsy, you know what happened then, the real estate market just crashed. Before that, at least one of the spouses was almost always tied to their house, and they were willing to make all kinds of concessions just to keep the house. I find that still exists, but to a lesser extent. I don't know about you, if you see that, but
I often will counsel that is not a good idea, because many times, like the wife, and I don't want this to sound sexist, but sometimes they want to keep that house and they can't afford to maintain it, and B, it's a burden. I mean, I love real estate and I love homes, but it's a commitment and work. And if you've got to start all over and readjust your life, unless you're really into gardening in a big way, and mowing the lawn and shoveling the snow and replacing things, my advice is always to think smaller.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as a longtime homeowner, oh my God, there's so much going on with a house, and before you know it, big expenses come up. So your financial plan has to incorporate all of those contingencies.
Right.
And keeping a house, I mean, it could be fine in a lot of cases, but I think you really have to vet the idea, and seriously, it's not a small decision. No. What I do find, though, is, you're talking about severing a relationship with somebody you've been with for a long time, severing maybe family ties, and then to say, okay, you've got to cut loose on this house that you're, invested in. And I don't mean financially, the neighborhood that you love. And it's just too much for people. They they can't do it all. You can't
Yeah.
have that many losses in a short period of time.
Right. It's selling a home, unless you're an army brat or whatever, it's very, very difficult for people. And it's very difficult even for the children and I've seen this a lot, whether it's a divorce or the parents just decide, we've had enough, the children go crazy over the parents selling the home, because
Often, yeah, for sure.
it is just such an emotional thing. So I think both of our jobs is to try and help people put that in perspective, to let them see now is an opportunity for a new chapter.
And the person who's more tied to the home, I would say that might even be the number one thing they tell me. I have to keep this house for the kids. Now, certainly that's a product of how old your children are. If your kids are 40 years old and live out of state, it's less of a concern. But if your kids are, college or, a few years after that, people definitely want to leave their homes. And I think a lot of people, when the pandemic started, were grateful they had their homes for their, many, many kids came back to live with their parents during the pandemic. So, yeah.
Well, this is, and so in parting, just the last thing, if you are, and I know this is sort of a big question, but if you are graying, or anybody, if you're interested and you're thinking about getting divorced, I always like to leave people with a few getting your ducks in a row, so that you're not taken. Do you have some words of wisdom for that?
Sure, I've got some suggestions. Thanks for asking. So and what that time frame looks like is different for a lot of people. I have a lot of clients who, reached out to me at one point, and then I don't hear from them for a couple years. I have others that actually hire me, pay money. It sits in a trust account, and they take no action for many years. So, especially at this stage of life, it is often a long-term process, just thinking about it and doing it. But, if you are thinking about it and you're not sure if it's going to happen, but it might, you certainly have time to plan and strategize about it. So, first you should probably at least consult with an attorney so that they can help you fine tune this advice for your particular situation. However, it's always good to retain records, gather up everything, especially if you're the spouse who's not in possession or control or has interaction with that. So you should do that. It's a good idea to check your credit score, and you can get free, not your credit score, I'm sorry, but your credit report. And you can get a free credit report 3 times a year from 3 different credit reporting agencies. Annualcreditreport.com, I think is the the link. And and if you have bad credit, you should work on fixing that. If you have good credit and you don't have credit in your own name, you should start getting it. And if you have any assets that would be considered non-marital, meaning things you might have had before you got married, it might be in a different form, you sold something, bought something. You could talk to your attorney about what non-marital means. But if you have those kinds of assets, you want to go and make sure you can get the documents that help prove that claim. Just remember that records aren't stored forever. So if if you're thinking you might not get divorced for a few years, by then those records could not be retained by financial institutions or others. So get them and have them and keep them in a secure place, internet or whatever, out of reach of somebody taking them and destroying them. Because without those records, you might have an impossible chance of proving something that might be very significant financially to you.
Right. Yeah. Possession is 9/10 of the law. I mean, this is,
Yeah. And in divorce, there's a heavy presumption that everything belongs to the marriage. So if you want to prove otherwise, you need records.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much. This was so interesting, and it's it's eye-opening that this is, and our world is changing as we are living longer, because I say the same thing in the real estate business. Part of why we have this home shortage is because people are living longer and staying in their homes longer. There's no reason to leave.
Right.
So these are different trends that are occurring because of that. So I'm so glad that you were able to talk with us and help anybody out there. If you have any questions, I'm sure you can reach out to Michael. I happen to know he does an amazing job and is also very calming. And
thank you.
so anyway, well, thank you so much, and everybody have a great weekend.
Thanks. Everybody have a good weekend too for me. And Betsy, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.